Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this presentation. We are going to wait just a few seconds to make sure that all of the attendees that are trying to join are able to connect. And then Tony Olenek will begin the introduction of today's webinar. Thank you again for joining us. We are now a minute past start time. So Tony, please kick us off today.
All right, very good, thank you. I'm very excited and happy to introduce Karl Lintner. Karl and I go back a number of years together. First of all, I'm the president of Nascent Technologies, and I'm a 30-year member of both the Society of Cosmetic Chemists and the American Oil Chemist Society. And the reason for that is I'm convinced that what we do in each of these societies is different from each other and complementary to each other. And I'm trying now to get my colleagues, the best of the best, to come and speak within AOCS to show that and to hopefully get some ideas going between the groups. Karl's presentation today is the use of plant proteins in personal care products. Dr. Karl Lintner is the CEO of KAL'IDEES S.A.S. He has obtained a degree in engineering in France in 1973 from Vienna University, and a PhD in biochemistry from that same university. After 10 years of research on biological peptides at the Nuclear Research Center in Saclay, France, where he had some 30 papers in biochemistry, biophysics published, he became the manager, then the laboratory manager first, then marketing manager of HENKEL in Düsseldorf. He joined SEDERMA in France in 1990 as the technical director, and later headed the company for 10 years as CEO. Presently, Karl is an independent consultant to the cosmetic industry in his position as president of KAL'IDEES. He has several dozen patents, numerous articles and book chapters on ingredients, and is an active member of the SCC in the US and the SFC in France. He was editor-in-chief of the Journal of the Cosmetic Science for 5 years. For 8 years, he taught master's level courses in UVSQ and ISIPCA schools in Versailles. He was awarded the prestigious Maison de Navarre Award in 2012 by the Society of Cosmetic Chemists, which is the highest accolade the society bestows upon people, and also won the In Cosmetic Lifetime Achievement Award in 2013. In addition to all these wonderful accolades, Karl knows his stuff, he's very good at what he does, and he's willing to share his things and knowledge and experiences with people who are coming in to be educated. So he's a good mentor and a good contributor. What we're going to do is we're going to send questions in, and if you could go back to the chat room and put your question in, it will come in, and at the end of the address, we will go back and look at the questions and have Karl provide the answers. So without any further ado, Karl, please.
Tony, thank you very much for this wonderful introduction. I wonder, are you really talking about me? Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. As far as I know, I've been told this is an international audience, so hello and welcome to this webinar. Thank you for joining us. It's my pleasure to talk about proteins, peptides, plant proteins in the personal care business. Here's the content of the presentation, a little bit of background of this cosmetics field, then a few words about proteins in skin and hair. What are cosmetic ingredients really? What do we mean by that? And it is not as evident as it may seem. Then we'll talk about applications for these plant proteins and derivatives. a little bit about the testing methods, because when you want to use something and claim something for a cosmetic, you have to have some data, and there are several protocols that you can use. And also a little bit necessary in today's environment are the regulatory aspects about
the shelf on the back. I think the second one down.
Any problem? Hello?
Nope, you're doing just fine. You're welcome to proceed.
Okay, all of a sudden I heard sound. Regulatory aspects about safety and the claims, and the conclusion. As in background, the personal care market estimated in US dollars is worldwide between 350 and maybe 400 billion US dollars. And the Europeans 84 billion, US 80 billion, Japan is also a big market, Korea is also. There's constant growth between 3 and 5% every year, with only very rare dips in the growth. That was in 2008, and then in 2020, well, the whole industry and of course everyone else suffered also, but otherwise it is a growth industry. Latin America, for instance, is still a country or a region where there's more growth than in Europe, because Europe is rather saturated with these products, and therefore the growth is relatively lower. But it's interesting, huge market. Now, I have been working for 30 years in the so-called category of cosmetic active ingredients. There is no real definition of what is an active, but nevertheless, there is an estimation which have a consensus of experts in the field. There is about $1.5 billion market for the cosmetic actives, for those products, ingredients that do a little bit more than a placebo. There's a hugely fragmented market with many, many players. Some of them are big ones like BASF and Croda with SEDERMA and others, but also many, many small companies who have something interesting to present as active ingredients, as ingredients for cosmetics. So these proteins, whatever they are called and how they are defined, used in cosmetics represent in volume approximately 2,000 tons per year. Is that big? Is that small? I can't really say, but it is nevertheless a sizable amount. Most of these proteins are presented to the to the formulating companies, to our clients, as hydrolized proteins, sometimes also called peptides, because indeed, when you hydrolyze a large protein molecule, you obtain a mixture of fragments, sometimes total hydrolysis all the way to the amino acids, or partial hydrolysis, where you have peptides of various fragments of various chain length and composition. For many years, 40 years, and still ongoing, actually, there are many proteins are animal derived. Milk gave us casein, keratin came from wool, collagen from fish skin or cow skin at the time, and also silk is an animal derived protein. Plant-derived proteins from wheat, soy, potato, and many other cereals and sources have gained an interest, especially since the 1990s, when we had the big crisis of the mad cow disease, the bovine spongiform encephalitis, where all of a sudden animal products went out the window. The industry didn't want them anymore. So we replaced them by and by with these interesting but different proteins from plant sources. Once in a while, formulators want native proteins, that's to say not hydrolyzed, to have a film forming effect or some other story. And there is still collagen from fish skin available on the market, or we also use higher molecular weight wheat protein for purposes that we'll see a little bit later. But it is very small compared to the amount of hydrolyzed proteins and their derivatives. From a chemical point of view, of course, we must also call the enzymes as proteins, but the enzyme market in volume is very small for various reasons, price and activity and safety and so on. So we forget about the enzymes in this talk. What's the cosmetic or the personal care industry? There are thousands of players in this industry. Of course, the important ones, those who sell to the consumers, are the formulating consumer brands, starting with L'Oreal and P&G and Unilever and all the others, and thousands of brands around the world. Then you have many OEM, original manufacturers, contract manufacturers, who either just manufacture or who also develop their own formulations, which they then try to sell to the brands. But very important, upstream of all this, of the formulation, is the domain of the suppliers of the ingredients. Essentially, all the formulators are just assemblers who take up to 50 ingredients in a formulation, all from various suppliers, more or less specialized, but almost all coming from the chemical industry worldwide, BASF and Dow Chemical, DSM and Croda, and so on, big and small. They all try to get into this very interesting, lucrative market. So you have the suppliers of the specialty actives, those actives that don't have a definition, but we still know what it is, what they are, like SEDERMA, where I worked for 20 years, and C-Lab and Givaudan and Seppic and Ashland and many others, together in cooperation with distributors, because smaller companies cannot be present in every part of the world. And then you have, also very important in this business, the testing laboratories, because you must make sure that your products are safe. And of course, in order to be attractive for these formulators to get into a formula, you need to be interesting. You need to have some claims of function or efficacy or skin efficacy or on the hair. And these claims that you can then promote to your customer, who will then sell them to the consumer, these claims need to be substantiated, documented. I don't like the word proven because we don't do mathematical theorems, but documentation and demonstration is what we do. And here again, you have an increasing number of laboratories who can help with this task. CROs, because contract contract research organizations that do these testings of safety and efficacy. Of course, consultants, most of them are retired, just as I, are also important to help smaller companies find out how to get into this business and make sure that it's all legal and safe and so on. And increasingly, activity from the regulatory agencies. Sometimes we think there is a little bit of over-regulation for a field that presents very little risk. But okay, we have to live with this. Unfortunately, there is no harmonized regulation worldwide, as we shall see at the end of the presentation. And of course, very important in this field is the press and the media, internet nowadays with bloggers and influencers, and of course the specialized press for the ladies, magazines, and technical press. And you have to live and work with them. Now, why are proteins so important, so interesting? From a nutritional point of view, we know the importance of proteins, of course, but actually our largest part and the largest organ in the human body is the skin, about 2 square meters and weighing something like 14, 15 pounds. 25% of this, of the skin, is proteinaceous material. And these are very specialized proteins, We have three major types, the keratins with strength and flexibility in the hair, but also in the epidermis. The keratins lead to the first layer, the important layer of the skin, the barrier that protects us. And there are many variants of these keratins from K1 to K10, and etc. And of course, 95% of the hair is composed of keratins, which, as I said, are, when you use them as an ingredient coming from wool. Elastin is an important protein in the skin, not only 2% of the skin's protein, but it is a very specialized protein with the capacity to keep the skin flexible and tight at the same time. Elasticity, viscoelasticity, firmness, all this, this bounce back reaction when you have young skin, that is due to the elastin, and it's a very important protein. Of course, collagen from a volume point of view is the cement that holds everything together. And collagen is in the dermis, in the deeper layer of the skin. Again, by now we have about 20 variants of collagen, but the most important is collagen 1, and then there's collagen 3, and several others that are important in this structure. And when we talk about plant proteins as ingredients, as being used in a cosmetic product, then there are cosmetic ingredients. How could we define a cosmetic ingredient from, let's say, regulatory or market analysis point of view? And there is a little bit of a problem because there is no legal a priori beforehand definition of what is a cosmetic ingredient, except as it says in the last line, except for the last 10 years, the Chinese government has issued regulations for cosmetics that goes the other way. That is to say, in China, there is a clear definition of what is a cosmetic ingredient. There are 8,737 ingredients in a list, which are allowed to be used in a cosmetic that is sold on the Chinese market. Everything else is prohibited, to the exclusion of everything else. So these are things that are allowed as cosmetic ingredients. But in the rest of the world, there is no such limitation. You can use anything in a cosmetic under two conditions. It must not be evidently toxic or a evident drug molecule or substance, and it must not be listed on a so-called negative list of which is issued by the various governments, where they decide these and these and these ingredients are too problematic, toxic, and should not be used and are prohibited. So anything that is not allowed is on a negative list, but everything else, what is allowed is what is allowed. It can be, what is not forbidden can be used in a cosmetic. Sounds a bit strange, but that's the way it is. So that means an ingredient becomes a cosmetic ingredient once it is in a formulation and not before. There is also, contrary to the pharmaceutical domain, to which we have some superficial similarity, there is no definition and no distinction in the cosmetic product between an excipient and an active cosmetic ingredient. Again, an exception, but not really. Of course, we have what's called the OTC, the over-the-counter product, which are freely available, but they are not cosmetics. They have the shape and the formula of cosmetics. But from the FDA point of view, and most other regulations in Japan, the quasi-drug and the Korean functional cosmetics, they are distinct. And in those cases, you have an active ingredient that is identified. But otherwise, in all the normal formulations, it's the marketing who defines what is an active. So that means our field of these products, no a priori definition of a cosmetic ingredient, and fortunately so, we do not want this Chinese list of allowed ingredients and no distinction between excipient and active means the whole area is a little bit vague, but that's good because that is where creativity allows us to be of interest to the consumer. When we talk about the active ingredients, they are usually the focal point of communication to the consumer. Here you see an example of an old product from L'Oreal that claims to have a collagen booster. We don't know what it is, but we imagine what it does to increase the thickness of the dermis and perhaps reduce the wrinkles, the visible wrinkles. Or on the other hand, a product that claims to contain kinetin, whatever it is, consumers don't know. Kinetin is a plant growth hormone, actually. What it does, the advertisement doesn't say, but it's something that is pointed out as the active ingredient, that makes the storytelling interesting for the consumer. And I could talk hours about active ingredients, of course, but that's not the purpose of today. The ingredients that go into cosmetics are, of course, highly variable depending on the type of formulation of the galenic form, solid or liquid, serum or whatever. And you have here a list of the most important types of ingredients. And of course, peptides and proteins have, over the last 30 years, increased their presence in these products. Now, when we talk about peptides or proteins, what do we really use here in our formulations? Proteins in cosmetic formulations are, as I said before, either native, unmodified in high molecular weight, or hydrolized. And when they're hydrolized, some people call them still proteins, others call them peptides. I represent this with this bunch of rocks, unidentified, not measured, size measured, etc. It's just a blend of fragments of proteins, and sometimes all the way to free amino acids. When we talk about peptides, we can talk about synthetic peptides, designer peptides, those that are made by chemists in the laboratory using the peptide technology to attach amino acids one after the other to make something similar to this pearl chain, where each pearl is a specific amino acid, and you have a very precise sequence. Now, this whole idea of peptides using synthetic designer peptides in cosmetics is about 30 years old now, but we'll not talk about it today because that's a presentation in itself. We'll stay with the proteins and the protein fragments. Nevertheless, these peptides, just one word on them. In SEDERMA, indeed, we were among the first, I'd say the first, to introduce peptides, designer peptides, to the cosmetic industry. That was 30 years ago. And you see here what I just said. Sometimes these collagen fragments are called peptides because, well, riding on the same train, but not spending the same type of money. These hydrolysates, what are their functions? What can you do with them in a cosmetic product? Well, first of all, you can have physical activities. For instance, moisturization. These hydrolyzed proteins applied to the skin, they have a good skin feel, and they keep by hygroscopy moisture, and of course skin moisturization is an important claim. On the hair, many of them are used on the hair, and they help to smooth the hair cuticles and then to help to reduce the energy needed for combing, to protect the hair also when the proteins are made to stay on the hair and not just rinsed off. Then they also have can have a protective effect. You can use them under conditions when you derivatize these fragments for the function of antifrizz, for instance, or for increasing the volume, the apparent volume of the hair after treatment. Those are physical effects. Sometimes it is possible for these blends, for these fragment mixtures, to find biological activities. But this is a little bit problematic because you cannot guarantee that every batch of manufacturing has exactly the same temperature, exactly the same strength in acid, exactly the same duration. And so between two batches, you may have variations in the type of blend, in the type of these rocks. And so your bioactivity may not be specific. And one has to be careful. It's possible, but there are not many of these products that claim biological activity. What is important, however, making such product derivatives is to look at the odor and color, because they can also change from one batch to another. And formulators, they hate that when you have variations in odor, particularly, but also in color. As I said, historically, hydrolysates were animal-based, but the mad cow disease, they stopped most of this business. Comes slowly back, but in the meantime, we are interested in plant proteins. Here is an example from the K company, showing what you can do with such protein fragments in skincare. Moisturization, emollients, skin smoothing, the skin feel is improved when you have a good amount. Sometimes you find proteins, these hydrolyzed proteins, collagen, also in dishwashing detergents. And you wash your dishes by hand, they include a little small amount of this to have this better skin feel. And I think these 2,000 tons of volume, they are more concentrated on the hair treatment. And you see here a beautiful presentation of damaged hair compared to repaired hair using certain proteins. Now, as I said, these plant proteins have found their place in the market. The biggest chemical company, BASF, has quite a large range of proteins, of plant proteins, wheat, sweet almond, rice, soy, and again, various variations of hydrolyzed wheat protein. Look at to the right, the molecular weight, or molecular mass, except for one, the first hydrolyzed wheat protein at 80,000 molecular weight is a non-hydrolyzed protein, but all the others are between 2,000 and 3,000 molecular weight, one even going down to 500. And we'll speak about this at the end, but this is an important thing to remember. The size of the proteins. BASF claims all this, what they can do. If you do it right, you can work on substantivity, conditioning benefits in the conditioner, film formation to keep the moisture both on the hair or on the skin, strength and repair on the hair. They talk about microproteins, which is fragments for deep hair penetration. The smaller the fragment, the easier it can get into the inner structure of the hair to strengthen it, and then you can claim anti-hair breakage, for instance. As I said, volumizing and lots of other claims that, of course, you should be able to demonstrate and to substantiate. And of course, today the word natural is a good selling point. So of course, plant proteins are natural. Collagen from cowhide is also natural, but curiously, some people forget that and think natural must only be plant-derived. But that's cosmetics. Other than these hydrolyzed basic proteins, wheat and soy and oat, you can also obtain proteins in much smaller quantities and then hydrolyze them under some more specific conditions to get something that is more characterized and specific extract, and this is an example of the hydrolyzed proteins from the seeds of this Hibiscus esculentus flower or plant, and it is claimed to give good protective and repairing effect again on the hair fiber, particularly on damaged hair. Softens and conditions the hair and improves sensorial properties, which is also very important as a claim for products. When you start to work on your protein derivatives, protein fragments, well, as I said, you want to do some testing, you want to have some claims. There are many technologies today available. For instance, the company Diastron has several of these techniques. Here, one is shown that measures the strength of the fiber. You take standardized hair and put it into this device, and you can measure the force necessary to break the hair. Not necessarily realistic, because we don't really pull on the hair until the hair breaks. The hair will come out of the skin perhaps before it rips into two, but nevertheless, it is a device that allows you to measure something. You know, Lord Kelvin said it in the 19th century, to measure is to know, otherwise it's just hot air. So you can measure the strength of the hair in this way, how much force to break the hair into pieces. There is a different device, or a little bit more sophisticated, that was developed by a Croda company. It's called flexabrasion, where you see to the left this technology, this apparatus. You take an individual hair and you attach it to the left, which is attached to a motor, an eccentric motor, which allows the hair with the weight to move back and forth and up and down. And so it is flexed, you have the flexion, and as it goes over the tungsten wire, and you have the abrasion, because you have the friction between the wire and the hair. And that resembles more what happens when you take a comb and you go through hair that has been tangled after washing. So this flexabrasion technology is, again, a device to, a more realistic device, to measure the protection of hair, the health of the hair, health under inverted commas, because here it's of course dead keratin, but we speak about the hair health, and one sees the improvement in this hair strength or hair resilience with various ingredients that can be proteinaceous. A few examples, I'm not doing advertisement here, but just examples of vegetal plant proteins that are on the market and what they claim. The hydrolized vegetable protein, which is then connected with propylsilantriol, so you get also derivatives with hair strengthening, consumer perceivable improvement in hair condition. That is important, that consumers can perceive what you claim. Dramatically reduces hair breakage from repetitive combing based on this flexabrasion technique. What I mean to say with these slides is that to get into this market, you need science. You need claims, and the claims based on scientific research. You need to know what you're talking about. The hair is quite a complex tissue, just like the skin, with the various layers, and it is possible with technologies today to measure the penetration of, for instance, of various peptides, various fragments. As the slide shows, the higher the bigger the length, the bigger the peptide, the more difficult it will be to penetrate into the cortex of the hair. But the smaller fragments, including individual amino acids, they can penetrate into the hair and affect their benefits in this case. With all this, you can then, of course, go with consumers and do studies with volunteers to see the difference with or without an ingredient in a hair conditioner. And then you analyze this from a sensorial point of view, and you connect the science with the consumer perception. Penetration studies, of course, are sophisticated. You need the technology, fluorescence microscopy, where you can see under high magnification the protein fragments or amino acids as they get into the deeper layers of the hair, and then show their benefits. Another product, we talked about volumizing, increasing the volume of the hair. This is an example of a protein that is coupled chemically to a methacrylate, and so it's a copolymer between hydrolyzed wheat protein and this ethyl triammonium methacrylate, a cationic monomer, which is able, of course, to attach to the anionic hair charge interaction. And you see a basic conditioner, you see a conditioner with just the hydrolyzed protein, the parent protein, but with this copolymer, you have a further addition, a further benefit, as the hair on the left shows. It's smooth but volumized hair. Talking about volume, the advantage compared of these products compared to a eye cream, which is 30 milliliters for 80 euros or $80, high-tech Estee Lauder or L'Oreal products. When you talk about conditioners, shampoos, and other hair products, we speak about much higher volumes, 5% of this voluminous, in order to achieve these kind of products, these kind of benefits. So it's an interesting domain, plant proteins in the personal care. Plant proteins for anti-wrinkle products will, well, if they're well documented and they have fantastic effects, they may be of great interest. But from a volume point of view, it will still always be small, because 30 milliliter bottle vial is not very big. A question, why do consumers seek keratins? Keratin, as I said, coming from wool, being the major proteins of the skin in the epidermis, and the hair comes from there. Well, they have been used for ages, for many years, but it is this desire for natural, although wool is something natural, but things have become a little bit strange in definitions, and especially now we talk about vegan, whatever you think of it, but the market is there. So Karl decided, probably was not the only one, to develop products, proteins that are as good as keratin, as functional, but without coming from wool. So here the name of this product, hydrolized pea protein and hydrolized vegetable protein, otherwise undefined, which are these proteins. But the important thing is, again, you have to document what you say, and you show with graphs like this, work fiber break, that this specific combinations of hydrolyzed pea protein and hydrolyzed other proteins gives you the equivalence, bioequivalence between keratin, animal-derived keratin, and this match protein. A lot of work, and this I won't go into the detail because of time limitations, and that's not the purpose, to do a scientific presentation of these details. But you just know, if you go into this field, you will have to do work, science, and understand what you're doing. Shampoos, of course, is the major market for these type of proteins. And here you see this Keramatch used at 1%, smaller percentage, but of course, very high volumes. Another example of how deep you can go into scientific documentation of what you do. And as I'm sure you know, pictures are worth 1,000 words. You can show the improvement of hair before and after damaged hair initially with all these irregularities, and then a smooth hair with some kind of product. Then you see these this in real detail, and that is good for advertisement. As I said initially, also briefly mentioned, what can these native proteins do? Moisturization, this fish collagen, for instance, but also skin tightening. What is skin tightening? Well, we know that wrinkle reduction, real wrinkle reduction, biological effects take time, because to repair the dermis and to really reduce wrinkles is a relatively long biological process. But for ages, it's been done. 30 years ago, when used horse serum, the blood of horses coming from the, let's say, slaughterhouse, and removing the red blood cells, you had serum, and the serum was sold in vials that you put on the skin, and then this protein, these albumins and globulins, dried on the skin and stretched the skin. And you see this here, a wrinkle before. You put on, in this case, no more horse serum, but high molecular wheat protein, and you see the rough surface at the beginning. And an hour later, when the protein is dried, it does not penetrate because it's much too big. It just spreads on the surface, and by spreading and drying, it tightens the skin, and the wrinkle disappears for a few hours. So this horse serum 30 years ago, and today these skin tighteners, they can be used when you go out to a theater, a movie, or a restaurant, and you want to look younger for at least a short time. Here's another product from a Spanish company, Provital. They're also very much into plant-derived products, hydrolyzed wheat gluten, hydrolyzed soy protein. So this is not gluten-free, hydrolyzed corn protein, a blend that they have worked on to obtain specific hydrolysates, and again, alternative to protein, to animal proteins. Try K again to see such an effect, statistical significant improvement of the energy needed to do wet combing. As I said, you have washed your hair, it's all tangled, and the energy needed, well, if you have the right protein to treat your hair, then the energy is reduced. You lose less hair, you damage it less, and that's a good benefit for the consumers. Another example of what you can do with these hydrolyzed proteins is also on the skin, not only skin tightening with non-hydrolyzed, but sometimes it is possible to show a real biological effect, a reduction in irritation when you have sensitive skin and a little bit of redness and itchy skin. Well, sometimes these hydrolyzed peptides, proteins, can be shown to have an anti-irritant effect. Anti-inflammatory is, of course, a very strong word, and which you would not use in the finished product communication, but as a supplier, one can say, well, it is an anti-inflammatory effect, but don't say it to the consumers. And when you talk about the skin rather than the hair, there are, of course, hundreds of protocols that can be used in monolayer cell culture, three-dimensional skin, in various protocols with enzyme activity and antioxidant and anti-inflammatory and gene analysis. It would take hours to go through all this, but these test methods exist if you want to look for more specific activity for your plant-derived proteins or protein fragments. You can also do what we call ex vivo tests. That's not just monolayer cell culture, but this is on three-dimensional skin, either coming from a skin biopsy from explants or from companies who sell reconstituted skin. And of course, when we talk about hair, it's also ex vivo because it comes from a living person and is then standardized. So ex vivo, of course, three-dimensional models for claiming any bioactivities are very good as an indication of what may happen in vivo when you do your final tests on on volunteers. We call this the clinical tests, usually done against the vehicle, against control. And again, there are dozens of protocols of what you can show from wrinkles and firmness and cellulite and so on and so forth. And sometimes some specific proteins like this hibiscus, so from BASF as mentioned, these kind of special proteins, not the bulk, but more specialized, they may have bioactivity. And talking about bioactivity, let's not forget that one has to be careful with that, especially in the US, but generally all over. The claims that you make must not make drug-type claims. We are not in the pharmaceutical space. There are differences between the cosmetic and the pharma. For instance, almost all countries, there is no pre-marketing approval. Registration, yes, just information to various government agencies, but in most cases for cosmetics, there's no pre-marketing approval, whereas of course there is for the pharmaceutical space. The efficacy testing, of which I've talked extensively, is your choice. It's not required, but of course it's recommended. If you want to make a claim, you better have some data to show that this is really true. This is less a problem for the FDA, it's more the FTC. The FTC, Federal Trade Commission, they want to make sure that the advertisement is truthful, and they can, when challenged, require proof or documentation of the claims that you make. But if you don't make any claims or very, very simple ones, you don't have to do testing if the things are self-evident. Whereas in pharma, of course, you cannot sell a drug without testing it. As I said before, no distinction between active and excipient. You can call glycerin an active, and there is nothing wrong with it. And it is, of course, an active ingredient. It has biological activity in addition to moisturization. But that's just an example. As I said before, to remember, any substance can be used unless it's forbidden, except for China. And of course, this China regulation has one consequence. Not only for the Chinese market, the cosmetic industry generally, once the big ones who also serve the Chinese market, these companies want to have a global formula, a global concept, a global story, a global marketing campaign. And if they use something new, innovative, interesting, well, they cannot use it in their global formula, and to have it only for selective markets outside China is just not very interesting. So innovation in this field has been pretty much frozen over the last 10 years, because if it's not on the Chinese list, it's not allowed, and if it's on the list, it's not new. Anyway, language in the claims, one has to be careful, especially with respect to the FDA. You have to look at the clear definition of what is a cosmetic, what is a drug, and one has to be very, very careful which kind of language makes a product a drug or a cosmetic. There is increasingly in the EU and of course also US what is called cosmetovigilance. That's to say actors in this field have to report adverse effects if there are any coming up from consumers, coming up from dermatologists or other sources to make sure once more that products are safe. Cosmetic products should be safe. They are a luxury. They don't heal any disease and should not. But that is why, of course, we cannot expect zero risk, but we have to minimize the risk as much as possible. So cosmetovigilance is an increasing additional administrative act. And one has to be careful to distinguish between the, as I said, OTC, sun care, for instance, sun care products are in the US are drugs, even if they're formulated like a cosmetic, but they're over-the-counter drugs, quasi-drugs also for sun care, UV protection in Japan, functional cosmetics in Korea. Sometimes these formulations can also be registered as medical devices. That's a kind of trick getting around certain regulations. In the EU, in Europe, a sunscreen protection against UV irradiation in the summer on the beach or in the slopes is a cosmetic, is regulated just like a toothpaste or a wrinkle cream for the eyes. It's a bit surprising, but that's the way it is. In the others, these other major markets, sunscreens with the filters and the activity and the SPF, they are regulated specifically more as a drug than as a cosmetic. Product safety, well, there is no universal harmonized text on this. On all of these, on the ingredients, on the claims, the rights and obligations of a cosmetic product, the various laws that exist, be it Indochina or Indonesia or Alaska or whatever, are very similar, of course. But sometimes there are differences which can be a trap for the person who's not aware of it. Unfortunately, in spite of many attempts to harmonize this worldwide, that has not yet succeeded. There is, of course, no specific legislation on the use of plant proteins. I just wrote an article which will be published in journal soon on this question. Well, plant proteins, do they have a special status? And I would say, fortunately, no. You can use plant proteins respecting the same regulation as you would for an oil or for a shea butter or other ingredients. So you treat these proteins just like any other cosmetic ingredient. One thing, of course, that applies worldwide also over the last years and is more and more administrative hurdle, that is the Nagoya protocols, the sharing of natural sources of the various countries, the gene sharing and so on. I can't go into the detail of the Nagoya, but if you work with plant proteins, especially something new, something innovative, then you have to think of this. Safety. The cosmetic regulation in Europe requires a safety profile that is in the Annex 1 of the regulation. The toxicological profile of the ingredients is used for the final profile. The ingredient safety testing is, let's say, negotiable between the formulating companies and the supplier. The supplier has to do safety testing to get an MSDS, but not necessarily specific for cosmetic purposes. Whatever is necessary for cosmetic purposes, well, it depends. If you want to sell, you will need some data, but then what if somebody asks you for a specific gene toxicity test and then buys 20 kilos per year, you will want to negotiate this. In the US, again, safety is not specifically regulated. There is the Cosmetic Ingredient Review Committee that looks at these cosmetic ingredients and tells individually this product is good, this product is not safe, and so on and so forth. With respect to protein hydrolysis, they came up to a conclusion, this is published in the International Journal of Toxicology, saying that hydrolysis, there is a typo in here, it's less than 3,500 Daltons. But when hydrolysates are smaller than 3,500 Daltons, then they're considered safe for cosmetic use. If you have higher molecular weight, then you should make sure that this product is safe and not allergenic, not leading to, well, sensitization, which is sometimes a risk with higher molecular weight. Proteins, because they're considered non-natural to your body, especially when they don't come from animals, but from plants, because the composition is different. So that's why this 3,000 Dalton limit was decided by this committee. If you have insufficient data, then the final consumer product is supposed to contain a label saying this product contains an ingredient that has not been tested conclusively for safety, which of course is not very good for advertisement. But other than this limit of 3,500 Daltons, there is no specific regulation concerning plant or any other proteins. A supplier, chemical supplier, has to respect the TSCA list in the US, the REACH legislation in Europe, and similar chemical legislation worldwide, which is independent of the use of the product. It is concerns only the inherent danger of a substance and cannot take into account the risk of using it, because the supplier has no control over how the products are used. So much very briefly about regulatory affairs. Again, this is a very large and complex topic where you have books and articles that help you. And this brings me to the conclusion, a few take-home messages. There is a large market for plant-derived proteins and these hydrolyzed proteins, the peptides, in the personal care domain, especially when trying to replace animal proteins. As I said, large amount of these proteins goes into the hair care sector to replace the wool keratin. And there are still lots of ideas, creative ideas to do in the hair care sector. We've been talking about anti-age on the skin, on the face, and other parts of the body over the last 30 years, 40 years. But the anti-age stories in the hair is not yet saturated. There are still ideas to find and then to document and then to sell. Of course, all this requires investment, some science mechanisms on how things work. You need good marketing to have storytelling, and of course, the best thing is to have clinical proof with volunteers or with standardized hair to show that your things really do what you claim they do. If you are new in this business and you want to enter these plant proteins coming from nutritional side, for instance, into the cosmetic, you have a learning curve to go, and sometimes it may be of interest to find a partner to do this together, somebody who is established in this business. Just remember that safety is first priority, efficacy and the storytelling, the innovative claims are the second most important aspects to keep in mind in order to reach success. Innovation, creativity, and marketing. Well, I'm sure you all know the cycle from the idea to the finished product and what goes to the market. And with this, I thank you for your attention, and we are ready for questions. Tony?
Thank you, Karl, for your presentation. I have some questions for you. One of the first ones was, can you comment on the difference in concentration of sulfur-bearing amino acid in proteins that are derived from plants versus animals, particularly related to hair straightening and maintaining disulfide bonds and things like that?
That is a very good question, but I am sorry, I don't have that the data.
Okay.
I don't know the answer.
Okay, let's see. Hold on a second. Let me open the. There was a question here. Could you define some of the laboratories that might be available to do safety testing?
Well, that depends on the country. In France, there's an international company called Intertek. There is IDEA. There is Eurofins, which is not only in Europe, but I guess present in many other countries. Eurofins, IDEA Group, Intertek, and then in the US, I don't know the laboratories who do that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Because,
Next question.
Never study in the US. We do it in France.
Okay. Next question is, how about the allergenicity of plant protein hydrolysate? In the past, there was an issue on wheat protein hydrolysate in Japan.
Yes, these Cosmetic Ingredient Review Committee is composed of toxicologists, chemists, and dermatologists, and they published a paper of at least 10 pages or so, doing very thorough analysis of all the toxicological data available, coming from suppliers, coming from academia, coming from the finished product companies. Whoever had data had an interest in supplying them to the Cosmetic Ingredient Review Committee, which is a lot of people around the table and experts. And they went through all this and came to the conclusion that hydrolyzed wheat protein and hydrolyzed wheat gluten should not have more than this 3,500 Dalton's size. If it's bigger, then there is a risk of allergenicity. I know we know that the company Procter & Gamble, for instance, but also L'Oreal and others, they are very wary of using proteins that are bigger than these 3,500. And you remember the slide I showed at the beginning from BASF? Most of their proteins, except one that was 80,000, but all the other proteins were between 2,000 and 3,000. So the suppliers and the industry are aware of this limitation, and anybody having not checked their hydrolysates for this have a risk of allergenicity. And sometimes these allergenicities can be severe, even lethal, just like peanut allergenicity, which can be lethal. It has happened that people have real problems with these proteins. So one has to be careful. Now, I'm not a toxicologist, but I found it a little bit surprising that the wording of this statement is that the average weight, molecular weight of these proteins should not exceed 3,500. That means there might be a few fragments which are 13,000 and others which are only 500, and the average comes out to 3,500. That is bizarre, because then you would still have things that are bigger than 3,500, and they might be allergenic. Again, I'm not a toxicologist, but I found this a little bit strange. So the risk is there. Some P&G says we don't take anything beyond 2000. They
All right,
don't want.
thank you. Here's an interesting one. Does hydrolyzed protein from coffee exist commercially?
Hydrolyzed protein from coffee beans. I don't know if it's commercially available yet, but it would not be surprising. I know that people work on this, the melanoidins and similar things coming from coffee beans. Is it commercially available yet? I don't know.
Okay, very good.
But the market is, I mean, the market is getting interested in this, so it's got to search for it.
Okay, very good. One more. How are the plants for the proteins obtained, and is there any concern related to sustainable sourcing?
I think responsible companies, responsible suppliers who produce these proteins, they, in today's environment, they are concerned about sustainability, and they will take the proper measures. There is little legal pressure, but the pressure from the consumers and then the formulators who sell to these consumers goes all the way back to the suppliers. I don't think that at present there is a big concern. Wheat protein, these use does not impact, I would think, not impact food production. And when you take proteins from seeds and you have small quantities of this to make a specific, like the hibiscus or similar products, proteins from flowers, from small plants, that has no dramatic impact on the environment or sustainability. But as soon as you are in larger tonnage, one is motivated to do what's necessary to be able to answer challenging questions like those. But I cannot guarantee that for every supplier. That is up to the companies to show their commitment.
Okay, very good. I think that finishes our questions. I want to thank you again for your enlightening presentation. And as we start doing more things within AOCS and our protein products group, hopefully we'll be able to find common ground to be working more closely together with you as well.
With pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. It was my pleasure to present this. Have a great day. Stay safe. And I hope we can someday again meet in presence and not just by video.
Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.